All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm filling in for Tremaine today. She's on the road, so I just wanted to say hello. Thank you for being here. I'm going to bring up Anne and Deb and Barb. Good morning. All
Good
right.
morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And am I correct in thinking that only two of you are presenting today? Okay. Who,
Yes.
who, who am I taking off of the hot seat?
Me.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So I'll be here running the slides. I'm going to remove my face from this show, but if you need me, just yell into the void and I'll be here.
Super. Thank you, Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Do we have everybody?
Jeremiah, do we have everybody?
Well, we have a good showing, so let's get going.
Okay.
All right. So we're talking today about resume writing. As you know, Jeremiah, can we have the next slide, please? Okay. So today we're going to talk about what a resume really is and why you should have one, and then a little bit about how to make one. And then in the end, we're going to do a little practice with somebody that we have a situation who's going to be trying to create a resume, and we're going to give you a homework assignment. And then next week, when we meet again, we're going to review what we did today just to keep us fresh. And then we're going to look at some examples that other people have done and critique them a little bit. And then we're going to review the homework, and then we're going to talk about how you can go ahead and create your resume. So if we can have the next slide. I'm going to take a little bit more detail now to say, really, what we're covering today is what really is a resume. And we're going to talk about that. Anne's going to tell you about that. And then we're going to say why you should have one. And then we're going to talk in more detail about the parts of a resume and which parts are the most important and how you make sure that the information on your resume is important. And then making a good resume, what goes into making a good resume. And then we'll do a little bit of practice, like I said. So we have an example for you of Elsa Chang, who is going to be looking for a nursing assistant job. And then we're going to give you a little bit of a homework assignment regarding putting some input into her template. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to talk about what a resume is. Next slide.
All right. So what is a resume? Thank you, Deb. So a resume is a formal document, and it has certain pieces of information on it, including, obviously, your contact information. It is also a summary of all your experience, and that means all kinds of experience: educational experience, work experience, volunteer experience. It particularly shows your professional qualifications, as I just mentioned, your work experience, but also it highlights your skills, your abilities. It mentions your education, whether you have any certifications, degrees, things like that, and whether you have any notable or important accomplishments, whether in the area of your work or elsewhere. All right, next slide, please. So why should you have a resume? It's because a resume will help employers decide whether or not they should hire you, okay? Sometimes you can fill in an application online, but it might not show very much information. But a resume will normally show a lot of good information that can help an employer decide whether or not you should be having an interview and maybe being hired. Usually in the US, a resume is required if you're applying for a job. Again, it will show the employer why you're qualified for that job. It will also help you to get very organized and prepared for a potential interview for that job, right? Because it helps you to highlight things that are relevant in your resume for that particular job. So again, it will help you to get that interview, which is the next step that you absolutely want to get. And it will usually form the basis for an interview if you should get an interview, okay? So a lot of reasons why you need this resume, and you need it to be very good. All right, next slide, please. So what are the actual parts of a resume in a little bit more detail, right? We've talked about it a little bit generally, but in detail, first and most obvious, you need your contact information. And usually you'll put your name, your phone number, the best phone number to reach you at, and an appropriate email. Also, if you have a LinkedIn address, certainly add that too. At this point, you usually will not put your home street address. And the reason for that is that it's just too much information, okay? We never know what's happening quite with our information on the internet. So if there's no need to put additional information like your street address, then certainly do not include it at this point, okay? Your other contact information is more than enough. Then at the beginning of the resume or the top of the resume, you'll have some sort of introduction, and this will usually contain your objective or your goal. What kind of job are you looking for? And it will put some key qualifications or the most important things that you want the employer to know about your qualifications. After that, you'll usually detail your work history and experience, starting with either the most recent or the most relevant. Okay, not always the same thing, but decide for yourselves. Either you put the most recent or what you think is most appropriate for that particular job. Then you'll also put some more details just to help the employer understand where you're coming from. So you'll put maybe your job title, the company that you worked for, and also the dates you were employed. So just note, though, it doesn't have to be the actual date, like, May the 5th, 2019 or whatever. You can usually just put the months and the year, or sometimes even just the year, if you held that position for a reasonable amount of time. And then you'll put your key responsibilities and accomplishments, and we'll be talking about that more later. And then the next category will be your educational history. Okay, and we'll talk more about that too. And then lastly, you'll want to put, the general category of any other relevant information. This would include things like skills and abilities that you haven't mentioned elsewhere, and maybe some volunteer experience. Okay, for some of us, we might have done a few very relevant volunteer things, and maybe, you didn't have a job for a while, but you volunteered. That can be a very important category to put some information in. All right, so let's go in with a little bit more detail. Back to Deb.
Okay, so when we talked about key strengths, those are things that will really sell you to somebody that you want to hire you. We have two different kinds, and we call them hard skills and soft skills. So let's talk about hard skills first. So hard skills are things that are very measurable. So some of those examples might be things like increasing sales or increasing the profit for the company that you worked for last or that you're currently working for. Or maybe you found a way to help them reduce costs so that more money could be kept, right? Go to the bottom line. Maybe you have specific skills for jobs that you did, like managing customer services. So maybe you worked a hotline, or maybe you were at the front desk, or maybe you were at the returns counter of a store. And maybe you helped also identify business needs. And so you were able to get the company to get some business that they didn't already have, or to get better at the areas that they had. And then Anne talked about this a little bit, skills that you developed on the job. So you're going to maybe have some of that in the job history, but maybe you want to talk specifically about some of those skills. Some of those could include things that we talked about already, but maybe administrative type skills, like you actually have some sort of computer software that you've worked with, or you did some financial work and an analysis, or you performed inventory. And then all of you probably have language skills that you want to just mention on your resume in terms of being bilingual or multilingual. Okay, so if we get on the next slide. So the opposite of those types of skills that were measurable, that we called hard skills, we call soft skills. And a lot of those have to do with how you deal with people, interact with people. And so some of those soft skills are communication skills and how well you're able to work with other people in your group. Flexibility and adaptability means that you're able to handle things that are not predictable. So a lot of times when you're in a customer situation, things happen that haven't happened before. And if you stay calm and you handle them well, that's considered to be flexibility and adaptability. You might be able to say that you're a quick learner, that you went into a specific area and you picked it up in a matter of a very short time. Stress tolerance. It's kind of the same thing of, how you managed with people, that there are a lot of work environments that are pretty stressful, but if you're able to manage that and you deal with it well, you may be able to say that that is part of what you are offering the new employer that you want to have a job with. And critical thinking and decision-making skills, they're usually very important. So you want to be able to say, okay, I'm not just kind of doing what I need to do to get by. I'm thinking about what would make things better, and I'm helping making decisions that can take some of the stress away from other people in the company. You might have a soft skill for coaching people, for helping them get better, or to teach something that you know that other people don't. And all of those are soft skills, and they could be very important depending on the job that you're looking at. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Anne, and she's going to talk to you about how to really have some do's and don'ts about creating a good resume.
All right, thank you, Deb. Okay, so what are some things that we should do when we're creating this really good resume? So firstly, perhaps most obvious, make sure that it's easy to read. So try and keep it fairly short and also keep it very well organized. Okay, the headings that we gave you, if you use those headings and you use them properly, your resume is going to look very nicely organized, and it's going to be a pleasure for the employer to read. Okay, they don't want to read, things all over the place. They want to know straight away. They'll get a very good impression of you if your resume is good. So keep it short and well organized. And incredibly important, proofread it. Okay, there is nothing worse for an employer than getting a resume that has a whole lot of spelling or grammar mistakes. This really doesn't look good at all. It looks as if you couldn't really be bothered with your resume. So absolutely have other people proofread your resume, in particular the spelling and grammar. And especially if you're not too sure yourself about your spelling and grammar, you can have several people read it. Just make sure that that is all really as it should be. Try to use short sentences or bullet points rather than having sort of more of a narrative. Okay, it's much easier to read if it's short and if you use those bullet points. Also, say what you did using active verbs. And some examples of these active verbs would be developed, created, implemented. So those are all things that you actually did. Also, usually use the past tense for your prior jobs and the present tense for your current jobs. Okay, that's very important. The job you're doing now as opposed to the job that you did or you had previously. And when you're using these action verbs, don't use the first person. Okay, don't say, I created, I developed. Just say, we know it's I, we know who did this. So just say created or developed without using the I at the beginning. Okay, that again keeps it looking very nice. Some more things that you should do on your resume. Say why what you did was important. Okay, this is a really good point, because it may not be obvious to the person reading your resume why what you did was important at that company. Say how it helped the company. And some examples similar to what Deb already said, you maybe helped to increase sales, or you maybe helped to reduce some of the company's costs. Some more things to do. Target the skills that you have which show that you can help the company that you're applying to. What is important to the employer for the job that you want? Okay, if you can tell the employer exactly why you're right for this job, exactly what fabulous skills you have that are going to be perfect for this employer, they're going to be much more likely to give you an interview and want to hire you. Okay, so that's important. Emphasize the most recent or the most relevant experience and skills. Okay, especially if your most recent job had the same skills, and perhaps even you had a previous job in your home country that required very similar skills. Okay, so do highlight all those things because they will be important. Also, another very important do is you will not necessarily be using the same resume if you apply to several different jobs. Okay, so you might have to create a somewhat different resume, so you can use some of the same pieces, but make sure that you tailor each resume to each particular job, because they might not require the exact same skills or be thrilled with the exact same experiences. Okay, so make sure that every resume is as appropriate as it can be for that particular job. Okay, next slide, please, Jeremiah. So now we've had a lot of do's, let's have a few don'ts on your great resume. Don't usually give information from your middle school or your earlier education, okay? High school is usually as far back as an employer would want to go. We've said you should use active language. That means don't use passive language, like it happened to me, right? It's always verbs of what you did. Never ever include photos. And usually you don't want to list any jobs that didn't last for very long. Now, occasionally you may have very little work experience, so you might need to include some jobs or a job that didn't last very long just to show that you have some work experience. But if you've had, some jobs that lasted a long time, certainly don't clutter up or make your resume more busy with just more jobs that didn't, only lasted, say, a few months. Don't give information that can cause discrimination. So don't mention at this point on your resume anything about citizenship, family, marriage, or children. Some of this may come up later. Some of it an employer may not ask you, but things that he may ask you, they may ask later at the interview, or certainly maybe when you get the job. Okay, but at this point, don't include any of that information. And don't give any of your personal information. We already said don't give out your home address. Very important, on your resume, do not include your social security number. Okay, again, this is just information that's going out on the web without you knowing necessarily where it's going. So don't include it. It's not necessary. All right, so that's quite a lot of information, the do's and don'ts and the specifics of what should and should not go on your resume. And now let's go back to Deb so that she can go through our example of a young woman who would like to improve her situation in life.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. So we're going to practice. This is the form that we're going to use. And it's not quite a resume, but it's getting us organized for a resume. And we're going to use this form today. We're going to just talk about some things today. And then it's going to be part of your homework. And we'll have a full size that is going to be attached at the end of this presentation for when you go home. We'll show it to you at the very end. And we're going to ask you to do some writing for homework. And you're going to get that. So it's, again, all of the parts that we talked about before and the parts that Anne walked you through. So we're going to talk about the objective. What kind of job do we want, and how we're qualified for it in key qualifications. We're going to talk about work experience. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about skills. That could be hard skills or soft skills. And then we're going to talk about volunteer experience. So Jeremiah, if we could have the next slide. All right, this is a little busy. I'm going to read it to you. So this is about for Elsa Chang. This is our example. So think about these things, because then I'm going to ask you about these parts that we just talked about. So Elsa Chang is looking for a nursing assistant job. She wants more predictable hours and less overtime because she feels like she's working a lot and she doesn't always know what her schedule is going to be until a week before she gets there. Where she works right now is the ABC Staffing Company. She's worked for that company for the last 7 years as a home health care aide. And her company says that she's good at keeping records and she's good at caring for her patients. And her patients like her a lot, and they're glad that she speaks Chinese. So let's stop here. What I'd like you to do is to put some answers into the chat box. Can we go to the next slide for a minute, Jeremiah, and then we're going to pop back? So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to use the chat box for some answers, and we're going to go through these parts. And I'm going to have Jeremiah put back the story up front so that you can see it and you don't have to remember it all. But what I'd like you to do is just to put some answers into the chat box, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, so again, we're going to start with objectives. So go back. We're good. Thank you. Okay, so what do you think is the objective that Elsa Chang has that she should put on the top of her resume in the first box? Anybody put something into the chat box for us, please? Come on, you guys. Don't be shy. Yeah, Jeremiah says don't be shy. What is her objective? What kind of job does she want? Thank you, Vincent. She wants to be a nursing assistant. That's right. Okay, good. All right. And what kind of key qualifications do you think she has for that? Looking at the first section, the first 3 bullets. What is she good at? What has she already done? What do people like about her? She's good at keeping records. Yes, that's right, Maria. Very good. What else? She worked in healthcare. Excellent. Keep coming. She's good at caring for patients. Yes. So all of those are really, really good things. Yes. Yes. Keeping records and caring for patients. Good. Very good. And, thank you. Very good. And she speaks Chinese. Yes. Super. Okay, let's go to the next thing. Let's talk about her work experience. So I'm going to read that part to you again. Her first job was at a hospital. We're going to call it DEF Hospital. She worked there from 2010 to 2015. And what she did there was she assisted nursing staff by monitoring the patient's vital signs. That means things like taking blood pressure and giving shots, drawing blood, and administering medications. So those were the things that she did at the job. And then she feels good about following the safety rules, monitoring the patients, and communicating the correct patient information to the rest of the healthcare team, the doctors and the nurses. So what should we put down in the format, in the template for her work experience? Oh, everybody's putting things in already. 7 years of experience as a home health care aide. And her first job was at the DEF hospital. Okay, and so we would put that in with maybe the years. And yes, she wants to work as a nursing assistant. Very nice. Okay. And is there anything else that we'd like to put about her job? Yeah, she was monitoring patients. Nice. Nice. And what else? What do you think is important? Do you think safety rules might be important? I think that might be important when you're in a nursing situation. Yeah. And she assisted the nursing staff. Yes. Yes. Very nice. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about her skills. Remember, we talked about hard skills and soft skills. So we have a couple of different things for hard skills, right? The hard skills were things that we just talked about at her job, that she was doing the monitoring of patients. She was doing record keeping. She was administering medications. She was drawing blood. Those are really hard skills. What do you think were some of the soft skills that were in there? Communicating the correct information. Yes. Yes. Remember the soft skills we talked about were like communicating and teaching and coaching and working well with others and stress management. Do you think any of those things? Yeah, everybody's a little ahead of me maybe on the education and certifications. We'll come back to that, okay? She's liked by patients. Thank you, Eunice. And she speaks Chinese. And safety rules. Sure. Okay, very nice. Very good. Okay. And the fact that her patients like her is an important thing, that she's able to communicate well with the patients and that she's able to communicate well with the other members of the medical team, of the doctors and nurses. That's important too, in a position where she's going to be an assistant. So, yes, a lot of good answers in there. Okay, now let's talk about the education and certification, okay? So she received her certificate in the Montgomery College Nurses Aid Program in 2010, and she completed a patient safety training program at DEF Hospital in 2010. What do you think we should put in for education, and how should it look? Education? Let's go back to education. I think somebody put some stuff in already. She got a certificate at Montgomery County. Yeah, that's important. And we're going to put the dates in, right? That's important too. And what other education did she get besides the certificate at Montgomery College? Yeah. She got the certificate at Montgomery. Yes, the patient safety training. Very nice. At DEF. Good. Good. All right. So the last bullet says during the pandemic, she gave shots at DEF Hospital as a volunteer, and she also helped with some of the record keeping for the program. Where does that go? So in the template, can you go back to the template for a minute, Jeremiah? So that last bullet said during the pandemic, she gave shots at DEF Hospital as a volunteer, and she helped with some of the record keeping. Where does that go? Volunteer experience. Nice. Well done. Very good. We had a number of people say that. Very nice. Okay, so can we go forward now? Okay. So you are going to take this form for your homework assignment. You're going to take that same story that we just did. And this time we talked through some of those things and we thought about what should go in the boxes. But what I would like you to do, what we would all like you to do, is to write some things down and see how it looks when you write it down and put it into the boxes. And again, I'm going to show you the form at the end, or I guess Anne is. Anne's going to show you the form at the end. But what we'd like you to do is fill it in with your answers. And then next week, when we have some of those back, we'll see what people did. And then we'll also show you what we did. And the answers that you put in and the answers that we put in probably are not exactly the same. And if you think about what Anne told you about having other people look at your resume, usually your resume gets better when you get other people to help you. And I know when I do resumes, and I have to update my resumes, from time to time, I ask other people to look at them and give me some feedback and say what they think. And I've always made my resumes better when other people looked at them. So there's not just one specific way to do all of these things. And remember, Anne also told you that if you have different jobs that are very different, then you would have to have different resumes, and they might be slightly different or they might be very different. So if Elsa was not looking for just a nursing assistant job, but she was looking for something in an office, then she would have to think about how to change the job. She would change the objective, and maybe she would start emphasizing more some of those skills that she had about record keeping and writing things down and working with other people in that way, instead of the nursing assistant and the patient care type stuff that she thought about. Right? So again, this is going to be your homework assignment, is you're going to fill in the form. Remember, it's not an exact template for a resume. It's helping you get organized. Next week, we're going to talk about how to take that information and put it into a resume itself. But that's kind of where we are. So at this point, I am going to turn it back over to Anne to sort of do a little bit of a review and then get your questions and comments.
All right, thank you, Deb. So what did we cover today? So we covered quite a lot. We talked about what a resume is. Why do you have to have one? What is it important for? Like, what is a resume? And then we looked in detail at all the different parts of a resume, a typical resume. We looked to see what it might be important for you to include. And we also talked about the order that things should be put in. Again, this is a very typical good resume. And then we gave you some examples of some things that you should do on a resume and some things that you should not do on a resume. So does anybody want to just quickly put in the chat anything that they learned today that you either should do? Let's start with what you should do on a resume. Does anybody want to give me a quick example in the chat of things that you should do in a resume. What should you include? What is it best practice to do? How should you put it together? Does anyone remember all those examples of things to do on your resume? We covered a lot, just a couple of things. What should you do?
Maybe not all, maybe just one or two from everybody.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so just if anybody would like to just put something, what should you do?
Volunteer experience? Is that a new comment?
That was already there. What should you even put in some of the boxes? Things that you definitely have to include. Here we go.
Okay. I learned not to use pictures and status and married. Nice.
Very good. Very, very good. Anybody else want to say a do?
No social security number. I'll read it for you, Anne.
Okay, very good. Thank you. It's a bit small on my screen. Thank you, Deb. No social security number. Good. That was an example of a don't. Anybody else?
This looks like a do. We have to have the contact information.
You do. You absolutely. Otherwise, how are they going to get back to you? How are they going to get in touch with you?
Home address. Do you want home address or you don't want home address?
Was that a do or a don't?
So I would just say no home address, right?
Right.
And
Yes,
then
we hope you meant no.
No photos. Contact information. Yeah, do not use the home address. Sure.
Right.
Okay, and then we have a do, a work experience, and the order of writing.
Good. All right, good. I think you remembered quite a lot of things. And
do you use the active verbs? That was a good one.
Yeah, very good.
And not middle school. Super.
Very good. Wow. You all were listening very intently. You all caught a lot of these pieces of do's and don'ts.
And then we have a question, is email better than the phone number?
If you have both, put both, because some employers might prefer to contact you using your phone number and some employers might prefer to contact you using your email. So if you have both, I would put both. That's not too much information at this stage. That just helps the employer with their chosen method of communication.
Okay, got it.
All right, good. Well, very well done, everybody. That was a lot of great things you remembered. So just to go over again on this slide still, the other things that we did today was after we learned all the parts of a resume, what goes where, the order, we did a little practice with Deb for Elsa Chang. And then she also gave you Elsa as your homework assignment. And in a minute, I'm going to show you, we'll send you another form, two forms. One is blank and one has some information on it after the next slide. So this was everything we did today. You have your homework assignment. And what you're going to do is you're going to bring your homework assignment with you next week. So you can either print out the sheet that we're going to give you at the end and fill that in. Or if you don't want to fill that in, you can just, or if you can't print it out, you can just write some answers in a notebook or on a piece of paper and bring that with you. So we're not asking you to send it to us ahead of time. We're going to discuss it in class. Okay, so just don't forget to bring it with you next week. All right, so on the next slide, does anyone have any questions or comments before we go to the last two things will be the two forms that we're going to attach, as I just mentioned, one of which you can print out and fill in if you like. So does anyone have any other questions or comments before we go to that? We'll give you just a second because I know it takes a while to type sometimes. I'm a slow typer, so. Okay.
The homework is the homework their personal experience?
No. So for the homework, at this stage, we're going to use Elsa Chang. So pretty much Deb went over, with your help, with you writing answers in the chat, Deb went over more or less what it is appropriate to include, and where it's appropriate to include it, Elsa's information on her resume. Okay, so it wouldn't really be any good if you all put in your own personal information, because that would be very difficult for us to have a conversation. We all have to be talking about the same person, or it's not really going to work very well next week. So that was a great question, but no, you are going to use the information for Elsa Chang. And you will be getting this PowerPoint, just in case anybody's concerned. You will be sent this PowerPoint with Elsa's information that you can use to put in her resume, you know, in the next couple of days. Okay, Jeremiah is going to be forwarding you all this information on the PowerPoint. Okay, that was a good question.
Can we edit the homework in the computer?
If you're able to do that, feel free. So you can take the sheet that we're going to give you at the end here, and if you want to put that into your computer as something editable, you know, you can certainly do that, and then that will be where you have it. The main thing is that you just fill it in somehow on the computer, in notes, print it out and actually write on the piece of paper, whatever you want to do that is suitable for you to fill in, that's absolutely fine. You just have to be able to access it during the class next week. Okay, so if you can do that, that's great. Any more questions or comments? All right, let's just go on to the last two pieces then, the attachments. And I'll just go over these, but then I will again ask at the end if there are any more questions. Okay, you'll have another minute to think about that. So the first of the two sheets that are at the end here, this is, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's these same boxes back up, you know, several slides ago that Deb was showing you to fill in. And the red writing just reminds you what should go in those boxes, okay? So if you like, the red writing is a summary of what we've learned today. For example, under objective, you're going to fill in, as the red writing tells you, what kind of job you want. And on the right-hand side, it gives you some examples and a bit more information about how to fill it in, okay? So this sheet is your information sheet, all right? You're just going to be looking at this while you fill out the information on the next sheet about Elsa Chang. So this is just for your information. It's kind of a summary of everything that we learned today. And then if we go to the next sheet, please, Jeremiah. Okay, and this is, as it looks, is the blank sheet that you're going to be using. Okay, so this is sort of your template. And again, this is a fairly simple resume. We didn't make it tremendously complicated, just so that you got the idea. But you'll see again, the boxes, it's the same boxes as Deb showed to you a while ago and as were on the previous sheet. Okay, but this time it's blank, so this is the one for you to fill in. And again, you can fill it in on the computer if you download it and put it on your computer as editable, or, you know, just print it out if you want, or just write in your notebook with the headings. Okay, so we've made it pretty simple for you to do the homework. And again, you're going to get the PowerPoint, you'll get Elsa Chang's story, and that's what you're going to be filling in on this. And don't forget to bring it with you next week. So that's the end of today's presentation. Are there any more questions or comments before we go? Hope that you learned a lot today about what to put on a resume. Again, this one's fairly straightforward, but we hope that the information that you heard today, you'd be able to take your own personal information and put it into this kind of format, maybe with a little more information, a little more detail. But this will be our start to see how well you do with Elsa Chang, and then you'll be able to do the same thing, hopefully on your own, all by yourselves.
So we're going to talk more about how to do that for yourselves next week.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Deb and Anne, and thank you all for joining us. As always, we're going to get that email out to you soon. And if you have any questions, you can always email. and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.